Welcome to Lifting Leaders Podcast, where we are unleashing leader possibilities to make a better world. I'm Crystal Roberts, and together with Trisha Ryan, we're diving deeper into some of the complexities of the world's most critical challenges and exploring innovative ways of navigating through them.
Through interviews with experts and leaders just like you, we're exploring what it takes to thrive as a leader today and examining new ways of thinking about how to creatively lead into a more equitable, socially responsible, and sustainable future. And the future starts now. Hello, Lifting Leaders Podcast listeners. Welcome back. Today, we're continuing our special series focused on coaches and how their work helps to make a better world.
As many of you know, both of us are certified leadership coaches through the Hudson Institute of Coaching and professional certified coaches through the International Coaching Federation.
What you might not know is that our passion for coaching and its positive impact on others led us to join the International Coaching Federation Washington State Chapter Leadership Board. This year, I'm honored to serve as the Director of Volunteer Services, and Crystal is the President.
Over the past several years, we've met some truly amazing coaches. Their diverse and impactful work has inspired us so much that we wanted to showcase just a few of these incredible individuals.
Some of these coaches we've met through our work with ICF Washington and others through associations like Hudson. We hope you find their stories as inspiring as we do.
What we know for sure is that if you utilize your strengths, follow your passion, and keep service to others as a guiding principle, you can make a positive difference in the world, no matter what career you choose. And a good career coach can certainly help with that.
I'm really excited about today's episode. I think it's going to be really interesting, and I think it's going to be an eye-opener for a lot of people. I know that I've known this person for about 18 months, and just following him on LinkedIn. And I've learned so much just through his posts and through a little bit of interaction that, for me, I wasn't sure that it would be an eye-opener for me, 18 months back, but it has been a growth experience. I'm so excited that we are today with our speaker here, with our guest. What do you think? You ready for this?
I am. I think what we're going to be talking about today is part of a larger sort of umbrella of neurodivergence. And that is something just in the last couple of years that has really become more of a topic for people to talk about. And it's also, people have really increased their understanding about what it actually is. And I was thinking about this with a friend of mine. So her kids are now college age. Mm-hmm. And the struggles, she has two kids that are neurodivergent, and at the beginning, basically they were just telling her, you're a bad mother and you're doing, everything wrong, and that's why these kids are acting out. And when they got to about middle school was when the sort of education system sort of caught up, and it was such a huge relief for her to know that, hey, there's things that we can do to help people, that these are strengths, and how do we help, how does she help her children capitalize on those strengths? And the world has changed so much. And so I'm loving that we have our guest here to think about this also, another step forward into coaching. And how do we help people who are adults that probably didn't have all those services that the kids had, have now. So I think the world is a much friendlier place for that.
I have 3 family members who are neurodivergent, and I think that it's interesting because we always considered that to be something that was unique to them. And what I'm finding out through just not only this person's LinkedIn post, but also through some reading I've been doing lately, is that there are more people than not who are neurodivergent. We just haven't identified, or we haven't put a label or whatever we want to call it on some of this stuff. There are more people than not who have some form of it. And so that's why this is so exciting today. Because I think it's going to be an aha moment for a lot of people. Be very insightful.
Yeah, it's really an important topic.
So let me introduce this person. I think it's probably a good idea. I am completely delighted to introduce Josh Speraneo. He was a courage coach, for highly sensitive people, introverts, and empaths with big goals and dreams. So let me share a little bit about Josh. Let's face it, many quiet, compassionate people struggle with self-doubt, fears, and limiting beliefs due to criticism, cruelty, or judgment they've faced in the past. And these struggles often prevent them from sharing their extraordinary ideas with the world, whether that be in the form of like writing a book or starting a business or standing up and speaking out about a cause they believe in. With all this in mind, Josh has designed a process to help empathic people create crystal clear paths to their goals and develop unwavering self-worth so they can finally put their ideas into action and become the powerful forces of nature they were born to be. Josh is a psychology major, a certified life coach, and a frequent podcast guest and summit speaker on the topics of high sensitivity, success, and self-worth. More than that, he's an HSP, introvert, and empath who's experienced the struggles that can accompany these traits himself and has learned how to turn them into strengths. Now he's on a mission to help his clients reclaim their identities, rewrite their self-worth stories, and rewire their minds for success so they can create the vibrant and fulfilling lives they've always wanted. Welcome, Josh. We're really happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, this has been something that you and I have been talking about a little bit for a little while anyway. I've been so excited that we were going to do this coaches series, and you were the first person on my mind. You needed to be here. This is going to be a wake-up call for people. It's great. So, Crystal, you have anything you want to add or talk about before we jump into our questions? We have quite a few today.
Yeah, just welcome Josh. And I got to know Josh a little bit through a program that the three of us were in. And I'm excited to be able to interview on the podcast.
Thanks. I really appreciate the kind intro and everything you shared. And I couldn't be happier to be here and be a part of the show.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to jump right into our questions because we do have quite a few, and we want to make sure we get to as many as we can. And that first one, this is our normal question. We ask this of all of our guests, and that is, Josh, tell us your story.
Yeah, and I love that you start with that question because so often when I think about answering that question, I want to give the polished version. I want to share, that I grew up in a small town in Missouri, big sister that I loved, who I tried to emulate and everything. She was, great in school, great musician, and just wanted to be just like her. My mom was compassionate and kind and super supportive. My dad was very protective of us as a family and had some mental health struggles, but was very, very intelligent, very inventive. He and my mom created a greenhouse business that was at one point known worldwide for its innovation and new processes for hydroponics. I graduated high school in that town, went to college, majored in psychology, had big plans, got a little lost for a while, and then found my way back and became a life coach. And that's the story that I want to tell you and that I want everyone to hear. But the reality is that there's a lot more to my story, just like there is for everyone else. I mean, as a child, I struggled in a lot of ways. Some of them were things from the environment around me, and some of them were things that were built into me. So in terms of high sensitivity, when we look at this topic, when we explore this, the technical term that most people have not heard is the idea of it's a trait called sensory processing sensitivity. And so the idea is that our central nervous system as HSPs is at a heightened level compared to the average person. So highly sensitive people make up between 20 and 30% of the population. And because of this heightened central nervous system that we have, we're constantly absorbing more from the environment around us. But being a kid, obviously, I had no idea about that. And I always just felt that I was weird or different. And because of other childhood experiences, it just heightened that sense. There was some abuse that I experienced as a child. There were some really turbulent times in our household. My dad's mental health struggles could be in the form of depression at times. They could also be in the form of extreme rage. And so what I learned as a child was that my dad, when he was in his bad times, was not safe to be around, but also it would stress my mom out, and I could see that. I mean, I remember nights when I would be laying down the hallway in my bedroom. I had a huge Rottweiler named Lancelot that kept me company and made me feel safe, but I would hear my dad talking about suicidal thoughts that he had, and it made me question what's wrong with me that he doesn't want to stay around. And so that led to some depression struggles of my own, led to questions of my self-worth, and it just was at times a very turbulent environment to grow up in. And so with those elements, and again with that just constant feeling of why don't I fit in better? Why am I not wired to just dive right into everything? Why do I sit back and question things? I mean, a lot of that led to peers calling names and bullying, and so it just was a really challenging time. And a story that I shared recently on LinkedIn that I couldn't share for a long time that may add a little bit more to the story was that when I was around 13, that was probably when the depression really started for me. It was also when I started having romantic feelings. And so I noticed that I had romantic feelings for a girl that I was in a play with. I also had romantic feelings for a boy that was a friend of mine. He and I went to a sleepover one time. And that evening, when all the other boys went into the room to sleep, the parents of the kid whose house we were staying at kept me aside, had me sleep out in the hallway, and basically said, you can either call your parents to go home or you can sleep out here by yourself. And I think that they had picked up on a little bit of flirtatious feelings that I had for that kid. But that, on top of the abuse, on top of everything else, just really made me draw inward and feel like there was something wrong with me, that I was shameful, that I would never fit in. And in my mind, I think that was the juncture where I made a promise that I would learn how to fit in. I would learn how to stuff my feelings down. I would isolate myself until I felt better and I could put my smile back on. And I would just figure out how to become who I felt like everyone wanted me to be. And as highly sensitive people and empaths, that's something that we're really good at. We can read people's emotions, so we know if they're happy with us, we know if they're not happy with us, and we can learn to conform to the mold of who they expect us to be, which led to perfectionism, led to people pleasing, and just some really unhealthy behaviors. And so fast forward through high school into college, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I found out that when I served other people, whether it was through a ministry opportunity or just a volunteer opportunity, that I felt better about myself, but also that seemed to give me a sense of worth. And so what I decided in going into psychology was that if I can find a career path where I can help other people, then I'll have value, then I'll be worthwhile, then I can redeem that sense of worthlessness that I picked up as a kid. And it turned into a very unhealthy addiction, basically, to people's approval, to fitting the mold of what everyone wanted for me. And obviously, if you're willing to help, a lot of people will welcome you back. And it just creates this cycle of going out and helping, feeling better, then the helper's high, as they call it, wears off, and having to reboot and just going through that over and over again. And it led to basically a situation of just extreme burnout. And I lost my job that I had. I lost a lot of friends. I lost the home that I was in and hit rock bottom. And on the other side of that burnout, or compassion fatigue is another term related to that may fit the situation a little bit better. I just thought I've got to find a way to come back from this. And I went into therapy. And it was several years before I came out of that funk. And in the midst of that, what I found was that there was a day, probably at the lowest point, there was a day I looked in the mirror and looked in my eyes, and I felt like I'm the man who killed Josh Speraneo, and I'm the shell that's left. And all I can do is just try and exist and stay out of people's way and not be a burden to my family anymore, to my friends. And so that was at my lowest. That was the deep, dark hole that I fell into. And fortunately, I didn't stay there. I discovered personal development. I dove into, just down the whole personal development rabbit hole. So reading books by Bob Proctor, Jack Canfield, Marissa Peer, Brene Brown, so many authors that the audience would be familiar with. And in their writings, the theme that I came up with was that I wasn't finished unless I decided that I was finished, that my life wasn't over unless I decided it was over, and that there was a way for me to reclaim my identity, rewrite my self-worth story, and rewire my mind for success. And so that's kind of the beginning of my coaching journey, was finding these tools and feeling like I need to find a way to share these with other people who are going through similar circumstances. And then it was really just in the last few years that I discovered that I was a highly sensitive person, that I was an empath, and in terms of the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, what type of introvert I was. And so the recurring theme there was that as I grew in self-awareness, I grew in self-acceptance and I grew in self-love. And it was just this continual process of learning more about myself, coming to understand that aspect of myself, and then learning to love that part of myself. And then going back and doing the deep work to open up those dark doors from the past and bring healing to those, so that as I showed up, it was the whole me, so that I could share the whole story. There wasn't that part that I was hiding or holding back. My friends and my loved ones got to see me come back to life and engage with them in a whole new way, and show up with so much more joy and courage. And so it's been an incredible journey. And to the point, back to the point of what we're sharing here today, as far as being a highly sensitive person, it answered so many questions that I had about why I always felt so different. As highly sensitive people, like I mentioned, we have that heightened central nervous system that's constantly making more connections with our brain in terms of our environment around us than the average person. And what that looks like, there are four traits that Elaine Aron, who coined the phrase and wrote the book The Highly Sensitive Person back in, I believe it was 1996, that she uses to highlight the trait. And so there's depth of processing, which is, as an example, for when I was a kid in school, like I mentioned, I wasn't the one that would just dive into the toy box and fight the other kids. I stood back and I watched and I observed. I always wanted to know what was going to happen before I took action. And so a lot of the audience will probably relate to that, of being more observant, being kind of quiet, maybe a little timid, and just wanting to know that it's safe before they take any action. So there's four elements. So depth of processing is one, overstimulation is the second. And that's when you think about the idea that the highly sensitive mind is taking in more from the environment. So the sights, the sounds, it's tying it back to memories, and basically like a supercomputer, it just gets overloaded. Overstimulation is that experience of my energetic battery is empty. I've taken in as much as I can process, or there's just too much going on in the environment for me to process, and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And then you have emotional responsivity, or empathy, is the third aspect of the trait. And that is just with highly sensitive people, the theory is that we have more mirror neurons. So when I'm watching you, I'm picking up on all of your unconscious movements, and picking up on nonverbal communication. So I'm absorbing your emotions basically as we're talking, as we're relating and communicating. And so all of that is being absorbed, which leads to an incredible amount of empathy, because I'm not just with you in the sense of being physically present, but emotionally I'm being present to what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. And the last part of that is the sensitivity to subtleties. And that is the idea that if a light is in a chandelier and there's one bulb that doesn't quite match the others, the highly sensitive mind picks up on that. We're observing that. If there's an odd smell, we're oftentimes the first people to pick up on that. If there's a weird sound that other people may not notice, or like if you've ever driven with somebody who drives without a seatbelt, which I'm not recommending, but if you have a friend who does that and the car is beeping and they're just ignoring it and it's driving you crazy, that's part of being a highly sensitive. It's like we can't just ignore things like that. They register and we want to fix it or solve it. So, so the DOES acronym: depth of processing, overstimulation, emotional responsivity and empathy, and sensitivity to subtleties. Those are those four aspects of the trait. And tying all of this back so we can keep going with the interview, it's just one of those things where I didn't know about this trait. My parents didn't know about this trait. And so they didn't know how to raise me accordingly. They did the best that they could, but I was more sensitive than most of the kids around me. I was more prone to emotional breakdowns or emotional struggles that I couldn't necessarily explain. And there were just a lot of hard times and what felt like dark times to me when the world just seemed to be too much, too loud, too chaotic. And fortunately, on this side of things, having learned about this trait, I've learned how to control the overstimulation. And when you get rid of that, all the other elements of this trait are strengths in my mind. To be able to perceive things and solve problems at a different level, to feel deeply for other people, and to be able to communicate that to them, your love for them, your compassion for them, and to notice things that others might not notice and bring them to the forefront and to be able to solve those problems before they even happen. Some of them, all of those things are gifts, but so often that's not the story you hear with this trait. You just hear about the overstimulation, and there's so much more to it.
Well, we'll
So let me tie that off there.
No, that's
and yeah,
well,
jump right in.
I was going to say we'll dig into that a little bit more, and we've got. Yeah. I think we have a question that pertains to that around leadership. So, but Crystal.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that, Josh. And I love how you told it in sort of like 2 chapters. Like one is this bright and shiny chapter, and the other is like this is real. Like we're going to take the cover off and we're gonna get into it. And I think that's so helpful. And what is interesting is I think. And we know this, right, through many of the books that you talked about, the Brené Brown book, that the vulnerability, that's what actually connects us to each other.
Yes.
And so by being vulnerable, by sharing your story, much more connected to this episode, much more connected to you. And I know that they're ready for our next question. So you've committed your practice to supporting the growth of highly sensitive people. So I love that too, that you are taking what you have learned, this hard journey that you've been on, and sharing it with others so their journey doesn't have to be quite so hard. Can you share who makes up this target population and why you chose to be a coach for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at it, like I said, just looking at the statistics, when you look at highly sensitive people, again, the theory is there's between, in the early writings with Elaine Aron's book, she talked about the idea that there was about 20% of the population. Last year, a book came out called Sensitive by Jen Granneman and Andre Solo, and their estimates, based on the studies and the time since then, are that it's probably closer to 30% of the population. So if we just say 25%, that means 1 in 4 of the people that we know, 1 in 4 of the people that we work with, at least, are highly sensitive. They have this genetic trait of sensory processing sensitivity. So if you have a coworker who often just seems completely stressed out by the environment, by bright lights, by loud noises, by constant meetings, there's a good chance that that person is highly sensitive. But when we really look at it, what's really fascinating to me is the fact that probably 5% of that group actually know that this trait exists. They know what it entails. They've taken a quiz or some way to find out that they are highly sensitive, and they're able to be proactive about it. So that leaves tons of people who have this genetic trait. It's not anything they've done. It's not environmental. It's not anything that was done to them. They have this trait, they don't realize it, and they don't know that there are coping skills that they could develop that would help them deal with the overstimulation and help them embrace their gifts of empathy and sensitivity and use those to serve wherever they work, to whoever they work with, to better engage with their families. And so the analogy I come back to a lot is that each of us has an energetic battery. For people who are highly sensitive and who are bringing in a lot more input, that battery runs down faster. So it doesn't mean that there are things a highly sensitive person cannot do and that the world is too much, which is so often, the namby-pamby stereotype that gets thrown out there around this trait. The reality is it just means we have to be careful how we budget that energy. And so getting lots of rest, getting time in nature, finding how we each individually refuel and can fill that energetic battery back up is just a key part of learning to thrive with this trait. And that way we can engage with the world, but also have that backup plan when we need to say, okay, I've got to take a step back and recharge. The statistics are about 70% of highly sensitive people are introverts. The other 30 are extroverts. And so for those introverts especially, you have just a natural desire and a need to step away to refuel. You also have, when you're around people, you're taking in a lot more stimulus. And so it's that sense of finding that balance. How do
Mm-hmm.
I engage and do the things I love to do, but also plan that time to refuel and rest and reset? And as we explore that and as we find that balance, I think that's when we can fully engage with the world as our authentic selves and really just show up as the boldest and most authentic version of who we were created to be. And so that's what I get excited about as a coach is helping people realize where they're struggling, what it is that's draining their that energetic battery, whether it's conscious or unconscious, taking care of those things and learning coping skills and strategies so that they're constantly showing up as their best self. They're constantly engaging with their family, with their friends, at their best.
I was going to ask you, how you see coaching changing people who are either labeled or finding out that they are highly sensitive people. That realization, there's got to be a process in coaching that helps them get to that point. And then how do they navigate through it, right? Because we're not asking them to change. We're not asking them to stop. We're asking them to we're not asking them to do anything except hopefully they will come to the realization and then find out their best way of navigating through where they are, right?
So actually, that's a good question. And it was popping up in my mind as you were talking earlier, too. So maybe we'll go off script.
Oh, wow. We've never done that.
Let's go.
So you had talked about that you were in therapy. And so I'm wondering, like, how do people actually know? Like when you said there's the sort of 4 pillars and, we can sort of listen to that and make our own judgment. Oh, that sounds like me. That doesn't sound like me. But is there a way for people to actually, if they think, oh yeah, that actually does sound a lot like me, is there like an official diagnosis that people get? Or is it more of something that you do your own research and
awareness or something?
Yeah,
right?
figure it out. How do they actually figure out that I fall into this category? Yeah.
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I'm glad you asked that. So Elaine Aron, who coined the term the highly sensitive person, her husband is a researcher for a university. And so what they did was they developed a quiz that people can take and can figure out based on these questions and the scale where they fall in terms of the sensitivity spectrum. Are they highly sensitive? Are they, an average level of sensitivity? Are they a little bit less sensitive than the average person? And so for anyone listening, if they go to the website HS person, like highly sensitive, hsperson.com, and on there you'll see a link to go to the different quizzes or self-tests. And there's an Are You Highly Sensitive self-test that they can take. It takes maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5, to go through those questions. And at the end of it, you'll know where you fall on that spectrum. So that's the easiest way to find out for sure, is to go to that official self-test from Elaine Aron. There are other self-tests out there that people would find if they just Googled highly sensitive person self-test. But because she coined the term and her foundation has done so much research into it, that's the one I would recommend that people go to. And honestly, for me, when I found out that I was highly sensitive, I was very skeptical because, like most people, I'd only heard the negative stereotypes. And I thought, I don't know that this is something I want to be proud of or I want to even, talk out loud about, because what does this mean about me? But like I said, the more that I've dug into it, the more I've learned, the more I realized, like, this is an awesome gift. This is an awesome strength. Once we learn how to manage that overstimulation, the ability to look at somebody and read their body language, to know to the extent that we can what they're feeling, what they're going through, to empathize with them on a deep level and meet them in their struggles, to cheerlead them and help them see the best version of themselves and believe in themselves, is a gift. And at the heart of being a highly sensitive person, we have this gift. We can solve problems at a different level because our brain is making more connections to the past and past experiences that we had. So we're able to see a fuller picture and bring that in. And so there's so many strengths that come with the trait that, again, I completely understand if people are worried or confused or freaking out a little bit if they find out they're highly sensitive. Because again, what most people have heard is, oh, well, this makes me weak or weird or different. And the term I love to use is, yes, we're different, but we're wonderfully different. You know, there are strengths that come with this. There are gifts that we have as highly sensitive people that make us a better friend, a better brother, a better son, a better partner, a better coworker, because of that deep level of empathy. And it's something to lean into and embrace. And to the beginning of your question, Tricia, what the process as I understand it, or that I work through with a lot of my highly sensitive clients, is this idea of awareness, understanding, and awakening. So the key part, like you're talking about, Crystal, is becoming your aware. Am I highly sensitive? Am I really sensitive but not specifically highly sensitive? Do I have that, a higher level of empathy than most people, but I'm not necessarily an HSP at the top of the spectrum? Because there are many people, obviously, just because of how life works, there are a lot of people who are in that middle range who are very empathetic but may not struggle as much with the overstimulation. But until we take that self-test and we figure out where we're at, we don't have that awareness of, is this a genetic trait that I possess or not? From there, we go into understanding. And you can read The Highly Sensitive Person. You can read the book Sensitive. You could read, there's a book called Sensitive is the New Strong by Anita Moorjani. And all of those books are super helpful at learning, okay, what exactly comes with this trait, the good and the bad? What research has been done? And how can I understand myself as a highly sensitive person? And from there, that's where I get super excited, because the next step is awakening to the gifts that come with sensitivity, or as my friends Philippa and Robbie talk about, the strength in sensitivity. And once we learn that element and we get the overstimulation under control, then it's all about just sharing this gift with the world and showing up as our authentic selves, and no longer feeling ashamed or weak or wrong or broken, which is where so many of us are coming from, because we've always felt so different. And instead, it's like, no, this is me. This is the real me. And I can be my authentic self and not be ashamed of that anymore. And I can embrace my empathy and not feel bad about these deep feelings that I have.
That reminds me of a conversation we had when we were doing the planning, and you brought up, I'd rather be sensitive than insensitive. And I thought, wow, I don't think anybody has ever coined that for me, and when I heard that, I thought, oh, wow, it's true. The highly sensitive people may be draining their batteries, but they're not insensitive. And I think that's the draw a lot of times. People have a sounding board. They have, someone to have their back. They've got, other people will be drawn a lot of times to highly sensitive people because of the gifts that we bring to the world, right? And so it can be extremely draining. And to me, it's amazing how many people there really are who do that. I was just at work yesterday walking around because I knew we were going to have this conversation. I thought, I'm just going to take a look at, because I see myself as a pretty much a very empathic person. And so I do read people. I try to be really intuitive. And so I was walking the halls and sitting in meetings, and I have to admit, I wasn't quite listening to everything we were supposed to be doing because I was so busy watching the way people were interacting with one another and reacting to things. It was like, this is a whole new world for me already. It just feels very different and very inviting at the same time, kind of powerful.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I was thinking how helpful it is for people also when they think about maybe their partner or their children or their brother, or their parents, as you were talking about, to be able to kind of go down that same path that you were just talking about, those 3 steps, right? Helping them so that your relationship can get better with them, rather than just judging somebody. It's like, what are you doing? I don't understand it. It seems different than I am, and why can't you deal with all the noise or whatever? Are you just complaining? The partnership is so important in discovering together, I guess is what I'm thinking. It's like we can go on this path together. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
What thoughts would you be able to share with those people who have only ever heard the label highly sensitive person or have never heard it? And when they did hear it, it felt negative, right? It had a little negative context. What statistic, we know about the statistics. You did tell us about the, 20 to 30, move to 30%. Honestly, I'm surprised it's not higher. But I just wonder what advice or what might you share with these folks who are either through this podcast today just kind of exploring the idea, well, I wonder if I am, how they can have it land for them.
So I think back to the what Crystal was saying, one of the easiest ways and what we discussed is just go to that website. If you're even at all curious, if this is piquing your curiosity about yourself, about a family member, a partner, or coworker, go to that test. Go to hsperson.com. It's not an affiliate thing. That's just the easiest place to go take the test and find out for sure whether you are or not. Pass the link along to them and have them take it and send you their results. And start there with that awareness. But also understand that if you've heard the phrase before, it may have been in a negative context, but that doesn't make it a negative trait.
Right.
So often what we run to as men, in so many men that I meet, it's almost like it reminds me of the Back to the Future Michael J. Fox. Nobody calls me chicken. So many men have that. You call them highly sensitive or mention they get that nobody calls me sensitive thing, and that's because we're trained to be so macho and masculine and not display our feelings, but that doesn't mean we don't have them. We just learn how to hide them really well, to stuff those feelings and to isolate until we can show back up as the man that people expect us to be or the person that people expect us to be. And so one distinction that I like to draw is that a lot of people want to create a dichotomy or a spectrum that is masculine on one side and sensitive on the other, and I think that's completely wrong. And the spectrum that I would present is being sensitive on one end and being insensitive on the other. And like you mentioned, Tricia, from our conversation, nobody likes to be around an insensitive person, someone who doesn't care about others' feelings, who doesn't care about their well-being, who treats them like trash, who could care less about whether that person is thriving or succeeding. And in a work environment, we've all had those insensitive bosses, those insensitive coworkers, and it's miserable. On the other hand, as much as people may dislike the word, everybody likes a sensitive person. Everybody likes someone who cares about them, who communicates compassion, who meets them where they are and cheerleads them in their efforts. I mean, everybody likes having that coworker who genuinely engages with them and asks how they're doing and waits for an answer and creates, like you were mentioning, Crystal, what came to mind for me is that ability to create a safe space, which is what empathy does. A space where I can be myself and I can be fully human and vulnerable, because as Brene Brown talks about, like you mentioned, there is no courage without vulnerability. So as long as I have these dark rooms in my heart that I can't share with other people, as long as I have these aspects of myself that I'm ashamed of and that I hide, no one's getting the real me, but also I can't show up as the courageous force of nature I was born to be. So all of this work, going back to the question, all this work that we can do to explore this trait, to the phrase I love to use is come home to ourselves as highly sensitive people and reclaim these elements of ourselves as strengths. Actually, when they manifest, they show up in things like the five, what I call the 5 pillars of healthy self-worth: beauty, courage, wisdom, joy, and love. And when you think about people that you know who've gone through a profound transformation, or maybe people who you just respect and admire, those are the traits you see in them. They have this fearless self-expression and uniqueness. They have this sense of enthusiasm and expectation to them. They have so much wisdom, this insight and this perception into the lives of others. They have forgiven themselves for the things that they've done wrong, and they found this new sense of freedom. And then they have a sense of confidence and resilience. And all of that can come out of this deep work, but it goes back to the beginning, taking the tests, finding out if we're highly sensitive. But the reality is everybody can go on that journey. Everyone can grow in self-awareness. Everybody can do the deep work through coaching, through counseling, or even just through reading and delving into the world of personal development to figure out what are those dark doors inside of me? What are those memories that haunt me, that if I could forgive myself or share them with another person so I wasn't carrying that weight on my own, I could be free of that, and I could show up as the person I was born to be, and I could create the vibrant and fulfilling life that I desire. So that's the long-term effect of this work that starts with just the seed of learning more about ourselves, is that eventually we become that version of ourselves, and it only grows exponentially. We go inward, but we grow outward, in the most amazing ways.
You're saying this, and I'm thinking, yes, it would take courage. And when you're talking about men, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because I have often thought, and I've studied psychology myself, and I've often thought the reason why a lot of men have a crash about midlife, it's not to, not the girlfriend car thing, but when they actually start not being in touch with their emotions, and they fly off the handle, or they get they have breakdowns, or they have to disengage from people because they don't know how to control their emotions. And I think a lot of this through coaching, it's a good plug for coaching, because through coaching or therapy or just even learning more about yourself, we might be able to actually minimize some of that in men who were just not understanding why they are the way they are. And those crashes only come when there's been something major in their life that's happened, like a loss of a parent. That can be really one that sends you over an edge, right? Or disengaging from a spouse or a significant other. Those kinds of things then test their emotions at a time when they're still struggling to figure out, wait, I'm supposed to be macho, but I can't feel that way right now. This doesn't feel right. And then that's when they realize they've been living a false life for quite a long time. And sometimes that's a little bit hard to take. So I think coaching there's a place in coaching for something like that, where, giving people that safe space and realizing that, that's all they need sometimes is that bubble, so that they can unpack it. To me, you were talking about that, and this all started flooding in about all the years that I have talked to men who have just struggled at that time in their lives when they never were quite authentic with themselves, but they always thought they had to be what they were being.
Absolutely. I love how you express that.
So tying this back to a leadership perspective, can you paint a picture of how the strengths that come with being a highly sensitive person or empath might play out in a boardroom or during a meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I think about it is, when you're in a meeting as a highly sensitive person, and obviously I can't speak to being in a meeting and not being a highly sensitive person because I don't know what that's like. But for me, and what I've noticed with other highly sensitive people, is we're able to read the room in a unique way. And so as we're part of the conversation, most of the time we're not going to be the ones who are exploring ideas out loud. We're the ones who are processing inward, and we need some time to process and make connections before we can share. So what I had as experiences in the past was a boss who was like, okay, here's my new idea. What do you guys think? And I would say, I need at least 5 minutes to process this and compare it to what we've been doing before I can tell you what I think. Like, I need a little bit of time to process and compare this to what we've been doing. And so the highly sensitive people, they're not going to be the ones who speak up first most of the time, because they need to compare what they're learning to what they already know, what has been the process up to that point, and then they'll share. So a lot of times, if you can give an intermission in the meeting, or just share a thought through an email ahead of time and let them process it and then come with their ideas, you're going to get a lot more interaction from introverted and highly sensitive people, because they've been able to take time to compare it to the status quo and figure out how it fits and what new thoughts they have. But sitting in that meeting, what you'll find is that the highly sensitive person is watching everybody in the room, and they're reading them. And what you'd see is that they'll notice when somebody isn't speaking up as much in the meeting, if they're having an off day, if they're getting irritated. A lot of times the highly sensitive person is the one who's going to pull them aside and ask if they're okay afterward, or even in the meeting say, hey, you're awfully quiet today. Are you okay? Is this bothering you, or is something else going on that we need to talk about afterward? There's that element of compassion, and understanding something's off with this person. They were not as vocal, they weren't as outgoing, but they're also really good at, if two people go at it and start getting really fired up, to de-escalate that situation and say, okay, I can see that you were both very passionate about your viewpoints. Let's all pause for a minute, process what we've covered so far, and then come back and share our unique perspectives so that we can work on this together. So they're great team builders, great leaders, great mediators, and they're really good about just, like I said, sensing when something's not right, when there's extra tension, when somebody's unhappy with an idea but not speaking up. And they're also really good at the ability to, like I said, follow somebody out of the meeting and just ask them, hey, are you okay? Do you need to come to my office? Do we need to talk? Is there something going on here at work that we can work on together? Is there something going on at home that you need to share about, and create that safe space so that that person can open up about what's going on? So whereas initially looking at it, all someone who's not highly sensitive might see as a manager is, so and so keeps coming to the meeting, but they don't speak up when I ask them questions, and I'm getting frustrated. The reality is, under the surface, all those things I just mentioned could be going on inside of that person. And if they're given some time to process it, all of those strengths, and especially if that manager would cheerlead those strengths in them and encourage them to bring that part of themselves to the meeting, and that manager would create a safe space within that meeting, all those gifts come out, and suddenly the whole team grows tighter knit. They come up with new innovative ideas, and they grow together instead of each one being a separate part. So there's so much unity and camaraderie and innovation that can come out of cheerleading highly sensitive people and helping them embrace their gifts.
Love that.
That's actually an aha, I think, for people who are in meetings and leaders who are watching their team members who are not speaking up. Maybe that could be what's behind it. It could be a lot of things, but that's interesting. I was in a meeting yesterday where 7 people did not speak a word, and
Wow.
there were 12 people in the meeting, and 5 very vocal people, but the others sat there. And my initial reaction was, are they sitting there because everybody else is doing, or these 5 people are doing all the talking? Or are they sitting there because they just are trying to drink in what we're talking about? And could be. I don't know. Now I'm going to have to go back and have everybody take the test. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
To that point, real quick before we move on, a really interesting distinction that I learned from David Hall, who has the Quiet and Strong podcast, is he mentioned the fact that introverted people think before speaking, whereas extroverted people think or speak in order to think.
Yes.
So if you have introverts in your group, they're going to need to process before they can articulate their thoughts and their feelings about something. Whereas if you have extroverted people and extroverted team members, they're going to need to talk it out just to wrap their minds around it. So there are ways that managers can utilize both of those strengths. Like I said, even just giving people a heads up of what's going to be covered in the meeting through an email or a memo ahead of time can enable those quieter people to come with their ideas instead of having to absorb in the moment and try and process it and then feel like they're a step behind in the conversation and why even join in. So that's something that was really eye-opening for me when David shared that, was I'd never seen it through that lens of introverted people think before speaking, extroverted people speak in order to think. And once I heard that, I thought, oh, I could do so much better now in so many situations of both empathizing with more extroverted people, but also prompting introverted people in helping them prepare so that they're able to share more ahead of time. And so there's just so many little things like that that we can do once we grow in awareness about ourselves and about others.
Yeah. That is in itself insightful, I think, for anybody who's listening. For me, that is insightful as well. I'm a screaming extrovert, so I can't help it. Cannot help it. But I am drawn to a lot of people who are very much sitting on the introverted side of that spectrum. And partly because I think we have a lot in common. We have a lot of connection there. But I do sometimes get a little perplexed when everything goes so quiet and I don't realize, have I disengaged you or whatever. So it's another lesson. So now we're here at the place we always like to arrive at some point, and that is our hope questions. And for our listeners, we're doing research, and we're going to be closing our research a little bit later this year. And Josh, we'd like to ask you some questions. So you ready?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. Where do you see signs of hope in the world today?
So the easy answer is everywhere. I mean, I think there's always hope everywhere, no matter how chaotic the world gets, no matter how crazy it gets. I would say for me personally, I see hope in the fact that so many of the macho stereotypes and the toxic masculinity is fading from view, that people are calling it out. People are letting men know they don't have to conform to those masculine stereotypes, the macho man stereotypes. And again, not that that means that they're weak or frail or fragile, but just that they don't have to shut down their emotions. They don't have to close themselves off. It's okay to feel as a man. It's okay to express your feelings. It's okay to cry. So many of those things that many of us growing up were told: boys don't cry, boys don't express their feelings, boys don't hug other boys, they don't hug girls. They just all those do's and don'ts. They play football, they don't sing in choir. They play football or baseball, but they don't play tennis. So it's like, from what I can see, I think so many people are starting to call that out, and so many men are realizing, oh, you're right. Like, I've been living into these stereotypes when I didn't have to. And to your point that you made earlier, Trisha, without going too far down the rabbit hole, there are people who are realizing, wow, I'm burned out and I'm exhausted from trying to jump through all these hoops that I was
Mm-hmm.
told as a man I have to jump through. When if I could just get in touch with my authentic self, life would be so much easier. I wouldn't have to second guess everything I'm going to say or all my feelings. I can just express myself and be open and vulnerable. And that's where, to me, the magic happens, and that's where I see the world going. Will there, do we see examples in politics and in all around the world in terms of what unhealthy masculinity is causing in terms of issues? Yes, we do. But we also see empathetic leaders rising up and compassionate leaders rising up, and their voices are being heard and amplified through different sources, so that we realize there's a better way, there's a different way. And that excites me every single day.
Wow, that's great. How do you sustain hope for yourself?
So I think of it in terms of lenses. So every day we get to wake up and choose the lens that we're going to view the world through. And that lens that we choose could be hope. That lens could be joy. It could be gratitude. It could be love. And so I sustain hope by choosing hopeful lenses and seeing the world through that. And it seems too simple to be the profound concept that it actually is. Like, literally at any moment, even now, I could choose to be stressed out and worried, and will I say the wrong thing? Am I going to mess this up? But instead, I've chosen joy. Like, I love hanging out with you guys. I love having this conversation. And so joy and love are what hopefully the listeners are picking up on. Enthusiasm. Those are the lenses that I'm choosing to bring into this conversation. And at any point, we could choose to be depressed. We could choose a lens of scarcity, of apathy, of fear. But instead, we also have the ability to pause and take a deep breath and say, no, I've chosen the wrong lens in this meeting, in this moment. And instead, I'm going to choose joy. And like Brendan Burchard talks about, bringing the joy to any given scenario. We can pause, we can do that. And that's, to me, how I maintain the hope that I have, is just by examining the lens, especially if I'm in a bad mood, if I go to a kind of a dark place, like, okay, what lens am I looking at this through? Because this isn't healthy. And how can I switch that lens and see the world brighten in front of me and see the hope in the situation and see the possibility? Whereas before it might have been hopelessness or scarcity that somehow had slipped on. And so that's personally what I do, is I look at that lens, and sometimes I even have to write a note on my hand to remind myself, like, no, stay positive, stay hopeful.
Yeah.
But there's always hope, there's always beauty in the world. We just need those reminders sometime to look at that and look at the lens that we've put on.
I love that. It's sometimes kind of hard when so many negative things in the world are coming down, raining down on us, right? But
Yeah.
just making that choice. I like that choice of words. It's great. So how do you engage or inspire others to be hopeful?
So I think part of it is the lens concept. I like to share that with other people. And the other element is just trying to have enough hope and joy for both of us. It's like when a friend's going through a hard time, I don't ever want to negate that. I don't want to pretend like their feelings and frustrations are not valid. I want to create that safe space and listen really intently to what they're saying and to empathize with what they're going through. But also on the other side of that, I want to see, okay, is there a way that I can inject hope and possibility into this scenario? Or do they just need to know that they're loved? Is that the best thing I can do is listen, let them vent, and just say, I'm here for you. I don't have a solution. I don't have all the answers, but I will be with you through this, whatever choice you make and wherever this goes. And I think for most people, just knowing that someone's in their corner like that, it instantly creates this sense that they're not alone. and that they're loved and that somebody will fight with them to help them through that scenario. And so for me, that's the easiest way to inject hope, is just to be hope for others, be present with others, be fully engaged, and create that safe space and that sounding board, and then promise to walk with them to the extent that you can through whatever they're up against.
So, if you could come up with one word that represents hope for you, what would that word be and why?
That word for me is empathy. And I know it's been a recurring theme throughout our time together, but I mean, empathy changes the world, it changes everything. When we show up to any scenario with empathy, with an empathetic mindset, an empathetic attitude, it shifts the dynamic of that. Where there was tension, the tension dissolves. Where there was frustration, the frustration can be mediated and worked through. Where somebody feels lost and alone, to know that they're not, to know that somebody deeply cares about them and sees them for who they are and loves them for who they are, it makes a world of difference. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, looking around at the world that we're in and conflicts overseas and political unrest, the reality is the world needs more empathetic people to stand up and speak out and to create those safe spaces. And, for me as a coach, my passion is helping those quiet, compassionate, sensitive people find their voices because the world needs them. Again, whether that is a book that they want to write, whether that is a cause that they want to speak up about, I want to give them that courage and do the work with them to help them find that courage that's innate within them, that's been waiting to be explored and brought to the surface, because the world needs to hear their voices. We hear so many voices that lack empathy at all. We see so many political leaders who've been raised to a position of power who have no empathy. And the reality is what we need is the exact opposite. And the more we can do that and we can lift those people up and we can encourage them to speak out through words, through speeches, through social media, whatever avenue feels most natural to them, I think as we do that, the world shifts and the world changes. And also, empathy is contagious. And so when we bring that ourselves, it shifts the environment that we're in, but also the people that we've impacted in that moment will go out and be more empathetic themselves. So it's this
Right.
ripple effect, or awakening is how I think of it a lot of times, this empathetic awakening that the world is ready for, but it needs people like us to bring the empathy, to bring that to every possible environment and workplace and scenario, so that it can spread like wildfire. And so that we start reading headlines that are all about people doing empathetic things and compassionate things instead of the headlines that we're getting right now. And it may not sell as many ads, but it'll change the world.
Yeah, when I think about what you just said, I'm thinking about how we are, in a world where we get news and, social media and everything 24/7, 365. And so people start shutting it out. They just go on autopilot because it's too much information. It's too much stuff and nothing seems to change. But if we change that scenario to positive or more hopeful rhetoric, people might stop and pay attention because it's different, because it's something that they haven't heard in a while, or it's something that's new. And that might actually start getting people to see things differently or start looking within a little differently. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. All right. So our last question, looking forward, what are you really excited about? What's next for you?
So many things. And to your point, Trisha, and then I'll answer this last question. I promise not to draw this out too much. But when you think about the word desensitized, that's where so many people find themselves, is just overstimulated, crushed by the world, frustrated, or feeling like there's nothing they can do to help people in scenarios. And so the media naturally desensitizes us. But conversations like this are a great wake-up call to say, no, there is something you can do. You don't have to change the world, but you can change your world by becoming the boldest and most authentic version of yourself, and then sharing that with the people around you and bringing that joy and energy to the people around you. And so I think what I'm most excited about in my life is just the opportunity to serve people and to invest in them and to help them on that journey, to kind of jumpstart that for them. And I know we mentioned LinkedIn, and that's where I do a lot of writing. And that's a lot of the goal behind the writing that I'm doing on LinkedIn is just to share these lessons, these exercises, and these tools with people. And so anyone listening, if they want to follow along, LinkedIn is a great place to go and to start a conversation with me. And you'll find my email address and all that. But I'd love to, if any of this has prompted thoughts or feelings or raised questions for you, I'd love to chat with you there. But I think just the goal for me in that is just connecting with more people, sharing and serving. And there are some free resources I have on there that I'd love to share with people. The other thing that I hesitate to answer because I haven't taken action yet, but it'll build in some accountability, is that I am planning on starting a podcast. And so my idea for it is the Quiet Force of Nature podcast, and it'll be success and survival skills for introverts, empaths, and highly sensitive people.
Nice.
So anyone who's enjoyed this conversation, go over there and send me a note and just say, hey, when's the podcast coming? I'm going to be following you here. I'm ready for it. Because again, I think we need to raise more awareness around this topic. There are so many people who feel lost, who feel broken, who feel weak. And the reality is they have these amazing gifts just waiting to be explored and unleashed. And that's what I want to do through that show, is just raise awareness, inspire and encourage people, help them come home to themselves the way that I feel like I've come home to myself, so that they can show up as the force of nature they were born to be. And we can start to make those changes like we were talking about, those ripple effect, start that ripple effect of empathy around the world, because there are so many voices and causes that are just waiting to be shared. And so many people who, like we mentioned in the intro, because of criticism and cruelty and judgment that they faced, they've shut down, and they've gone inside, and that their voice is not being heard. And I just want to make sure that they find their courage and they go out and they share their voice, because the world needs them. Anyone who's listening to this and that's resonating, the world needs to hear your voice, your idea, your unique message. And that's what I'm passionate about. That's what's next, I guess, is leaning into that podcast and continuing to share on LinkedIn and encourage people there.
Well, we are going to keep watching you, and you've got a loyal listener coming if you just put that podcast out there. But also, we're going to put all of the links that you've given us and also that we know about for you on our show notes. So anybody can get, if you want to reach out to Josh, or if you want to, look at some of the resources that he was referencing today, we'll have those links in our show notes. This has been delightful. Thank you. This has been really wonderful. It's been eye-opening. I think people will love, maybe for the first time, hearing that this is okay. This is not only okay, it's great, right?
Yeah.
Josh Speraneo, we are loyal fans. Thank you so much, and we look forward to following you and hopefully having another conversation again in the near future once you get your podcast up and running, right?
Awesome. Right. Well, thank you again for having me. Thank you for your friendship, your encouragement all along the way, and just for this amazing conversation, the great questions, especially those that we didn't necessarily have planned that came up, and for letting me ramble on a little bit here and there to explore this with you guys. I've loved every minute of it, and just thrilled and really hope that it resonates deeply and that people will take action on it. Go take the quiz, reach out to you guys, reach out to me if there's anything we can do to help or serve them, and help jumpstart that journey to becoming the best version of themselves, because that's what we're here for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was really informative and inspirational.
Yes, I was going to say I am inspired. I think I want to learn more about this. I do, after, following him for a while now, I do feel that I fit in that category. I'm just not quite sure, how I would label that, for myself, but I'm wanting to explore more. I want to find more. So
yeah, I'm taking that.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, what, if you looked at the coaching population, I bet we score higher than the 30%.
I would say so too. And that's interesting you should say that, because that came to mind while we were talking to Josh. I didn't want to bring it up because I knew it might take us down another rabbit hole. But honestly, I know so many coaches who are very empathic and who are highly in tune with how other people's body language and just expressions, everything, or just the sense, the feeling in the room,
Yeah.
when somebody's there and they're not something's not resonating with them. So I would venture to believe that that is true.
Yeah.
That we have probably more like 60% or maybe even more than that. Who knows?
Yeah. So let's keep the conversation going. If you have questions or comments about the show, you can find us on all our social media channels at lifting_leaders. We have so many exceptional podcast episodes coming up with more fantastic guests. So be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen. If you know someone who would find this episode inspiring, share it with them, text them, email them, or take a screenshot and share it on your Instagram and tag us at lifting_leaders. If you'd like to know more about us, our guests, or the show, please go to our website at liftingleaderspodcast.com. You'll find our show notes there as well. If you're looking for help in developing your leaders or would like a growth opportunity yourself through leader coaching, please contact us through our website at www.liftingleaderspodcast.com. Thank you to Ari Chance Roberts for his technical support of our show. Finally, please take 30 seconds and follow us. It helps you because you never miss an episode. It helps us because you never miss an episode. To follow us, go to the Lifting Leaders Podcast Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Then just tap the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner or click on follow. While you're there, if you'd be willing to give us a 5-star rating and review and share the episode with a friend, we'd be so grateful. Thank you, Tricia, for bringing Josh to us. It was fantastic.
It really was. Thank you, Crystal.
And many thanks to you, our listeners. We appreciate you. Find ways every day to lift each other up. Have a fantastic week. Bye.